Start. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ana Zangroniz, and I am the Florida Sea Grant Extension Agent here in Miami-Dade County. And I'm here to say this is our inaugural launch, if you will, of this partnership effort between myself and my colleagues from Miami-Dade County Eco Adventures. And we have some of those folks on the line: Heather Tedlow, Ed Pritchard, Candy Medrano, and Crystal Espinosa. And I have to give a shout out to our supervisor, Mr. Paul Vitro. And we're going to be offering these every Friday, certainly through the month of April, and depending on how long the quarantine situation persists, perhaps into May as well. And right now they're scheduled every Friday from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. And we will be posting the week's topics and registration links for the webinars on our social media on Mondays and Tuesdays. And I've got those handles at the end. So today we're going to be talking about lionfish, which is a very common invasive species here in South Florida, some of their effects and how to manage them. Oh, I had to throw in the logos. Sorry, I got ahead of myself, but this is a partnership between all of these entities which are connected behind the scenes. And this is me, in case you can't see my lovely smiling face. I'm the Sea Grant Extension Agent, and the next time we do this, we will have photos of all the rest of the team to show you as well. So as we start, I am going to invite you guys to, oh, I lost my poll capability. Take a poll with us. There it is. Okay. So I want you guys just to take a moment and, using your mouse, make sure you scroll all the way down. I'm going to give you guys a minute or two just to give me your best guesses to what you think the answers are to the following questions. So you should be able to click right on the screen into the poll box. Heather and Ed, do we see the poll box?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Good to go.
Fantastic. Number 1, when was the first lionfish sighted in Florida? Number 2, what are some impacts of lionfish in Florida? Number 3, true or false, lionfish are poisonous? Number 4, lionfish have spines in which fins? And number 5, true or false, you need a fishing license to remove or fish for lionfish in Florida. So we'll give it about another minute. Just give it your best guess, no pressure. All right, I'm going to give it about 30 more seconds, guys. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're going to go over these answers later. All right. Thanks for participating, everybody. Now, if you look at this map that's on your screen, this is not interactive, but it's a live map that shows the lionfish sightings in Florida since the first one was sighted in 1985. And that happened off the coast, just off the coast of Dania Beach, which is slightly north of here. If you watch this map, the spread of those dots continues. It starts in Florida, and the spread of those dots go further up the Atlantic coast of the United States, throughout the Gulf of Mexico, off of Florida, into the Caribbean Sea. And what you can't see, but what other maps indicate, is that those red dots, or those sightings, actually go further south off the coast of South America. And you'll see how they have substantially increased over time. Lionfish have been found off the coast of Massachusetts. However, they don't tend to survive the winters further north than about Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. So in just about a little over 35 years, the lionfish population has increased substantially throughout the tropical Western Atlantic and the Caribbean. Now I'm gonna have a little experiment for all of you guys. If you move your mouse to either the top or the bottom of your screen, you should get a little menu option. And that's the, oops, you should be able to see a little feature that says annotate. And Heather and Ed, tell me if you guys can see this. Did we lose it?
That feature is live.
Well, I'm not too worried. I'll keep going in the meantime. All right, scrap that. We're not going to use the annotate. Oh,
yeah, it's there.
Okay,
Okay.
okay. So for those of you guys who are online, if you're able to move your mouse to the very top or bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a toolbar menu, and one of the tools that's listed there is an annotate tool, and it has a symbol of a pencil. And if you click on that pencil, it will pop up a number of options that you can use to actually mark on my screen. And so you can choose a simple pencil or a stamp. And what I would like you to do is go ahead and choose an annotate tool and pick on this map that you're seeing, indicate where you think lionfish originally come from. I see a big circle. And if you're not finding the annotate tool or your head is about to explode, please don't worry about it. This is us experimenting and with all that Zoom can do. All right, excellent. So I see circles and arrows and stars. Fantastic. Yes, you guys, I've seen a star, a big graffiti spray paint something. Oh, an arrow in the Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean. Yes. Excellent. Good. You are correct. Lionfish are from the Indo-Pacific area of the world. And it is highly likely that they made it their way here through either accidental or intentional aquarium release. When we talk about invasive species, and lionfish are no different, their effects are generally classified into 3 or so categories. And those are the ecological or environmental impacts, the impacts to humans, and then as a result of those 2 categories, there are also economic impacts to be had as well. So we're going to talk about some of those now. If you guys check out this slide, there are some really nifty little infographics that I pulled from NOAA, and they are indicators of just a few of many ecological consequences of lionfish. One of the ones that I like to point out is that lionfish have these fantastic, voracious appetites, and they're able to eat a lot, and their stomachs can expand 30 times their normal size. And they're capable of reducing a localized reef fish population in as little as a month and a half. These fish also spawn or reproduce all year round, and that's extremely different from our fish that we have here, most of which only spawn once a year. Because they come from the Indo-Pacific, where there's a lot more biodiversity, lionfish here essentially have really unbelievable immune systems, and they're able to resist a lot of the naturally occurring parasites or diseases that we have. In addition to being able to eat a lot, they, on the reverse end of the spectrum, they can also go for days or even weeks without eating. And I can personally attest to this because during the government shutdown of 2013, we had 3 lionfish in an aquarium, and we weren't able to return to the visitor center at Biscayne National Park to feed them. And once the government reopened and we returned, those fish were still swimming around and alive. And another big thing is that from a biological perspective, the native fish here don't recognize lionfish as a predator. And therefore they're unsuspecting of them, and they're essentially ripe for the picking for the lionfish to eat them. And as is with the case with other invasive species, there are no natural predators here that can help manage them, just humans. More than 100 species of fish and invertebrates have been found in lionfish gut content. And this is just a handful of examples, but we're talking juvenile fish and invertebrate species. These fish can eat things that are quite large, but it still has to be smaller than they are. And lionfish can consume prey that's half their body size. To give you an example of what this really looks like, this is a series of photos from a lionfish that I dissected. So this is my hand in these photographs. And you'll see as I pull out the stomach cavity that not only does it have a fish in it, but this fish is 6 inches in total length when you compare it to the 12-inch lionfish that I pulled it out of. So this was a perfect example of a lionfish eating a fish half of its body size. And this is a red band parrotfish. In this instance, this lionfish was removed from the water pretty soon after it had consumed the parrotfish, which is how we were still able to identify the species. A lot of people ask me, well, lionfish are such pretty fish. Why is this a problem? And you can think of this from an environmental or ecological perspective. You can think of these in terms of direct impacts or indirect impacts. And I've heard from divers and fishers, oh, lionfish are destroying the reef. And that conjures up to me this mental image of lionfish causing physical damage to the reef, taking baseball bats and bashing in corals, and that's not really accurate. But as a direct result of their presence here, they are substantially reducing native reef fish populations. And if you think about that, if we're losing juvenile fish and invertebrates, we don't have adult fish and invertebrates to help sustain our fish and invertebrate population. And this has implications not just from a recreational perspective in terms of snorkeling and going to the beach and diving, but also fishing, because fishing, both recreational and commercial fishing, are major drivers in Florida, and people come from all over the world to do these activities in Florida. One other thing that I want to mention is that in addition to lionfish invading the reefs and minimizing these populations, people are always asking me, why are the reefs in trouble? And it's a cumulative effect of multiple stressors. So when you think about things like overfishing and water quality issues and coastal construction, this issue of invasive species in a reef system is just one more stressor that's added to that overall mix. Now, when it comes to human impacts, lionfish aren't particularly aggressive, but they do have 3 sets of venomous spines. And I just want to take a moment and point out the difference between venomous and poisonous. Poison is ingested or consumed, whereas venom is injected. Now, these 3 sets of venomous spines are located on the top of the lionfish in their dorsal fins, under their body in their pelvic fins, and under their tail in their anal fins. There's a lot of misinformation that some lionfish, they have the spines in the pectoral fins, and that's not true. Top of the body, dorsal, under the body, pelvic, and under the tail, the anal fins. And these spines contain this venom, which is released mechanically, and it can result in a number of really unpleasant effects. And those differ depending on each person's sensitivity to it, where they're stuck, how severely they're stuck. I do want to say that this has never resulted in a fatality for humans, but it is unpleasant. At the very least, it's a burning and itching sensation, but it also can lead to severe pain, swelling, and in some cases, chest pain. And the big takeaway from that is that if you are out for a day on the water, whether you're fishing or you're diving, you could have the most epic, wonderful day imaginable. But if you're to come into contact with one of these spines, and usually it's accidental, typically the only thing you're really going to take away from the day is that you've been stuck by the lionfish, and you're only going to remember the misery that came from that. I do want to point out, this is just a little badge of honor. This was my first and only stick. There's a little red dot on my left leg. This is off Key Biscayne, right outside of Stiltsville. And this happened to me my 2nd week on the job as a lionfish intern in graduate school. It was completely my own fault. Fortunately, it was a really minor stick. And I will tell you that after a couple of hours, the pain went away, but my left leg from the knee down remained swollen for about 6 weeks. And really the best way to treat a lionfish stick is with hot water, as long as you can tolerate it, as hot as you can tolerate it, because the heat basically it neutralizes the toxins. And so I wanted to show this picture. This is a real person. This is my dive buddy. And this is a stick he got in his knuckle at 130 feet. So travel with caution. Usually it resolves itself on its own, but you can, if stuck, go to the hospital or call the poison control center locally. Now, I wanted to take a slightly closer look at a more focused area when we think about lionfish population in Florida. If you all remember, a few minutes ago, I showed you the lionfish distribution map throughout the eastern United States and the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean. And this is we're gonna look a little bit more deeply at Biscayne National Park, which is where I did my graduate school work. And this is one of 4 National Park Service units in South Florida. And this park is just off the coast of Miami. If you check out the map to the left, you'll see the green boundary line. It extends all the way north just off of Key Biscayne and goes all the way south just off of Card Sound in Key Largo. And this is the largest national park in the entire National Park Service. It's 173,000 acres. 95% of that is water. So needless to say, it is a suitable location for the lionfish invasion. This is a Google Earth map of Biscayne National Park in 2010. Biscayne saw its very first lionfish in 2009 and didn't see another one for a whole other year, at which point the staff there began actively surveying for lionfish. And you can see that the red push pins indicate 2 or more lionfish found, the yellow indicate 1 lionfish, and the green indicates none. So this is the Google Earth map almost 10 years ago. And this is a more recent version of the Google Earth map. So you can see that not only did the number of red pins increase, but so did the yellow. And there are still sites within the park where there are no lionfish, but all in all, there are a substantial increase in lionfish within Biscayne National Park. And I invite you guys to go ahead and type in the chat box, and I'll ask Ed and Heather to read me some of the responses. How many lionfish do you think have been removed from Biscayne National Park waters currently? So I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to type in some answers. Uh-oh. Stop annotating. Heather and Ed, are we getting any responses?
John says 50. Laura says 10,000.
10,000.
All right. I'll go ahead and tell you. I don't know who just drew on my screen though. I'm a little upset about that. All right. As of just under 2 months ago, we have 9,600 lionfish removed from the park. And to give you a little bit more context, compared to almost a year prior, that was about 2,000 less. And something important to keep in mind is that these numbers only reflect the number of lionfish removed by park staff, interns, and volunteers. It's not reflecting the number of lionfish removed by park visitors or fishermen or any lionfish that are getting caught as bycatch in commercial lobster traps. So the reality is the numbers that you see here are likely much, much higher. So I think Laura was the winner. It's probably more like 10,000 fish. Now, something that's really important that I want to point out is that scuba divers have a really unique opportunity to help manage lionfish populations. Science has shown that if lionfish are removed continuously for every 2 months, that the populations at a site can be managed pretty well. And so this is most commonly done by 2 methods. 1, the use of hand nets, and 2, the use of the pole spear. And I want you guys just take a second and type in the chat, what might you think some of the pros or cons to either method would be? Or why might you choose one versus the other? And I'll ask Heather and Ed to report back to me. Do we have anything from the chat?
You might get stuck using a hand net.
That's very true. You might get stuck using a hand net. Well, I will add on to that. Hand nets are typically used when you want to keep the fish alive for whatever reason, whether it's for display in an aquarium or whether it's for tagging them or using them for some kind of scientific study. The nets are to keep the animal alive. The pole spear usually results in the death of the animal, and so that's why you would use the pole spear. It's actually also really easy and effective to use. Something else that I want to mention is that lionfish require no saltwater fishing license in the state of Florida. Okay, now that is only for lionfish. If you want to hunt lobster, grouper, hogfish, snapper, any other fish, or do crab traps, you need a fishing license. But lionfish have no fishing license requirement. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has waived that, and that was one of the steps that they took to really try and promote capture and removal of these fish to help manage them in Florida's waters. Again, only for lionfish. Now, lionfish are often most successfully removed on scuba, although if you're comfortable and competent freediver, that works as well. But it's really important to consider going back to the basics when thinking about hunting lionfish. And that goes back to this whole tenet of plan your dive and dive your plan. First of all, talk about this with your buddy and make sure that they're on board. Because as with adding any sort of activity underwater, it increases the complexity of your dive. So you want to make sure that your buddy knows what you're going to do and is in agreement with you and is also watching out for you. Also thinking about maybe whether or not, if you're a new diver, should you be trying to task load and play with a spear or a zookeeper underwater? Same thing goes for evaluating local conditions. Is there a really strong current? For example, when I go up to Jupiter and dive, Jupiter is all drift diving. And in Jupiter, the Gulf Stream comes in really close, and the current is usually at least 2 to 3 knots, or if you're not familiar, 90 miles an hour. So it can be really challenging to try and stay in one place and track lionfish and hunt lionfish under those conditions. And for me personally, after a couple times of trying that, I no longer try to pole spear in Jupiter. Also thinking about things about like your buoyancy, making sure that you're not hovering over the bottom from 15 feet above, trying to shoot lionfish, or on the other end of the spectrum, lying on the bottom. Also making sure that you monitor your air consumption and your gear. It can be really easy to get so involved and embroiled with something that all of a sudden you've been chasing a lionfish for 10 minutes and you look down, you only have 500 pounds of air left and you need to go back up 60 feet. So these are all things that are really important to keep in mind. This is a video of an example of safe pole spear hunting. Lionfish are pretty tame and they'll let you get really close to them when you want a pole spear. So it's really best to get as close to them as possible. Make sure that there's nothing else in the way. Make sure your buddy's not in the way. And you can pretty much put the prongs of that pole spear on your lionfish before releasing it. And a pole spear, for those of you who might not be familiar, it's essentially an underwater slingshot. And it's not a gun, it's called a pole spear or Hawaiian sling, and I'm happy to tell you more about that in an in-person workshop when all of this is over. And the thing that I want to stress, no matter what, is to not do any more harm than good. There are risks associated with this. Scuba diving itself is very, very safe, but you do have to remember that you're task loading, you're underwater, you have to be responsible for yourself and your buddy, and you also don't want to harm any natural or cultural resources under the water. No shooting of other fish, no shooting green moray eels, no chopping up sponges. You really want to make sure that you're taking only pictures, leaving only bubbles, that kind of mentality. When it comes to safe spearing, as I mentioned, it's a pretty easy technique to do. And for those of you who know me, you can attest that I am extremely clumsy on land. And I've managed thus far, knock on wood, for the last 7.5 years to shoot only lionfish and not myself or my buddy. And things that you want to keep in mind are making sure that the prongs of the spear, first of all, you're not swimming around with that spear loaded or that band cocked with all the tension on it, because it is essentially a live weapon, and that you're prepping the band, you're prepping the spear only when you're getting ready to shoot. You want to make sure you're getting the prongs of the spear as close to the fish as possible. And then once you actually make contact and make your shot, holding on to that fish as tightly as you can and bringing your container, whether it be a zookeeper or another sort of bag, bringing it to the fish rather than swimming around with the fish wriggling on that spear. These are really hardy fish. They can wriggle off the spear and keep swimming, and you'll have lost your fish. When you're thinking about handling in terms of getting the fish into this zookeeper, which is basically a PVC tube that allows you to safely transport the fish underwater, or you can use a lobster catch bag, you really want to make sure you know where those spines are in relationship to your body at all times. That once you have that fish on the spear, you're making sure you know where it is, because the second you take your eyes off of it, you're setting yourself for greater risk. When thinking about safe fish removal, I want to clear up and offer a few best management practices, if you will. Something that I've seen on different dive trips are divers who spear a fish and then cut the spines off underwater and let the fish go. And I cannot stress this enough. This is a terrible idea for many reasons. The first and foremost is that this is torturous to the animal. Most of the time, unless you get a direct hit with the spear to the head of the lionfish, it's still alive. And while these are an invasive species, the fact that they're here isn't necessarily their fault, but we're trying to play our role in managing their invasion as humanely as possible. So to cut off the fins with the spines and send them on their way is extra harm to the animal, and it's really, from an ethical perspective, it's not acceptable. And the second is that even if those spines aren't attached to the lionfish, they are now floating through the water like little underwater daggers and putting other divers at risk of coming into contact with them and getting pricked or envenomated. The third is that these fish are extremely hardy. And this is evidenced, I have an example in this photo of a lionfish that got a bite taken out of it, likely by an eel. And this fish was removed from a wreck in 130 feet of water. And even though its guts were hanging out, it was still swimming around and alive. And even if the fish does not have its spines, it can still eat. And that's really what we're trying to manage, are these fish preying upon other native fish and invertebrates. When it comes to handling the lionfish, it's important that you take your time. There are a number of products available, different types of gloves, puncture-proof gloves that will let your experience in handling the fish be a lot safer. First important thing is I recommend not handling these fish on a boat, especially if that boat is moving and rocking and rolling. Once you get on the boat, I would put these fish on ice and then, if possible, not touch them again until you get back to the dock. And putting the fish on ice is the quickest way to humanely euthanize them. Once you have these fish on a stable platform, you can remove their spines, which can be done with a tool as easy as a really good pair of scissors. And if you see in this set of pictures, you just cut the spines right where they connect to the fish. So again, you're removing the dorsal fins, which have the venomous spines, the pelvic fins, and the anal fins. And once those fins have been removed, this fish is completely safe, not only to handle, but also eat. Remembering that there are no poisons or toxins in the tissue of the fish. So the larger the fish you have, the larger the fillet you have. And once those sets of spines, the 3 sets of spines have been removed, you can safely handle and fillet the fish as you would any other fish. In fact, this has been a campaign that originated with REEF, the Reef Environmental Educational Foundation, out of Key Largo, and they started this campaign, Eat Them to Beat Them. And that was really to try and encourage the consumption of lionfish meat because it is safe and it is tasty. It's very flaky white meat, similar to hogfish, to try and encourage people to harvest their own lionfish, as well as lionfish are being sold not only throughout restaurants in Florida, or should I say served, but also at restaurants throughout the United States, which is pretty fascinating. Apparently, they're really something if you fry them whole, but just remembering that even though if they're fried, heat has denatured the toxins, but you could still get stuck and that might be uncomfortable. But there are quite a few ways to fillet the fish and cook it up. Another way to get involved is to participate in a Lionfish Derby. Now, these are really large scale contests in Southeast Florida. They're managed by Reef. And there are these contests where people go out, divers go out en masse and remove lionfish. And this can result in several thousand fish being removed from an area in a single day. Unfortunately, the first Lionfish Derby of the season, which was supposed to be last Saturday, was canceled due to the pandemic. But as of right now, the future Lionfish Derbies are still on schedule. And this is the website for the Lionfish Derbies hosted through Reef. And if you're in a different part of the state, it might be handled through a local environmental agency or nonprofit organization. And if you have questions about that and you're not in Southeast Florida, I'm happy to help direct you to the right person. But these are really fun events. There are prizes for the most number of fish removed, as well as the largest fish and the smallest fish. So it's a really effective way of helping manage a local population. So now that we're getting to the end, I want to invite you guys one more time to do one more poll with me. If I can get the screen, there we go. Get the screen to come up. All right, and you should see the poll.
It's up.
So one more time, 5 questions, choose the best answer. And I always encourage you to go with your gut, go with what your gut thinks. I'm gonna leave this open for about a minute. All right, I'll give it about 30 more seconds. Don't be shy, guys. We're gonna go over all of these as soon as I wrap it up. Okay. Now, tell me if you can see the results of the poll.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. John, I see that you raised your hand. I'm going to ask you to hang on to that thought for just a minute because we're almost done. And Heather, can you please note that John had a question?
Yes.
So I'm going to go over the answers. Lionfish have spines in which fins? The pelvic, dorsal, and anal fins. Lionfish are poisonous. False. You need a fishing license to remove or fish for lionfish in Florida. False. When was the first lionfish sighted in Florida? 1985. And what are some impacts of lionfish in Florida? Ecological, economic, and human. Nice job, everybody. All right. So with that, 2 more pieces of business. I want to thank you all so much for joining us on this launch of our conversation conversation webinar. It's so hard. And Heather and Ed are going to put the link. We have an online evaluation for you guys to take. So they're going to put the link to that in the chat box. For some reason, it won't show up as a hyperlink. So if you're comfortable copying and pasting it, that would be great. I will also send a follow-up email with a direct link to that. And I encourage you guys to follow us on social media. In addition to posting cool and fun stuff, we'll also be posting the topics for the week's webinar, as well as the registration links on there every week. So I want to thank you guys once again, and I encourage you to please type any questions into the chat box, and Heather and Ed will help me monitor those and get those answered for you. All right. Do we have questions?
I have just positive phrase. So here's one. Can you steer lionfish in marine sanctuaries?
Okay, Heather, you're a little funky there, so.
So Lauren said, can you spear lionfish in marine sanctuary?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. In the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, there are different zoned areas. In the zones that are called sanctuary preservation areas or spas, you are not allowed to pole spear. You may remove with hand nets, but that requires a permit that you can get through the sanctuary. In the other zones of the sanctuary in Florida, yes, you can pole spear, but not if you're in a sanctuary preservation area. If you're unsure about what some of those are, as an example, Molasses Reef is a spa, Hen and Chickens is a spa, Lou Key, and they're marked by giant yellow buoys in all four corners, and you can look those up online on nautical charts, that is. So no pole spears within sanctuary preservation areas or spas. And there are also lionfish in the Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary off the Texas-Louisiana coast, but you can only remove lionfish there or pole spear there if you're on one of their specific trips to do so. And I see,
yep.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Laura says excellent presentation, and John says thanks a bunch.
Awesome, thank you. And John mentioned pole spears are limited, and I'm not sure, he might mean within sanctuaries, but also there are rules around pole spears within a certain distance from a public swimming beach or a fishing pier. And I believe it's 300 feet. And those regulations specifically are within the FWC saltwater fishing publication, which is released twice a year, but generally no pole spear within 300 feet of a beach or a fishing pier, as well as I believe in state parks in Florida. All right. Does anyone else have any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right, well, with that, we're gonna wrap this up. Again, if you can, please copy and paste the link to the final evaluation into your web browser. It's anonymous. We welcome all feedback because we're gonna use it to continue improving these programs. Thank you all very much. We hope to see you here next Friday. Right now, it's gonna be set at 1 p.m. and 5 p.m., same presentation both times. And we might play with the later time a little bit to accommodate everybody's schedules as best we can. So thank you, and please keep in contact, keep in touch, and we look forward to seeing you guys next time. Thank you, Heather and Ed and Candy, for your support. And Crystal.
Thanks.
Great job, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.